Welcome to Downtown Sports. My name is Downtown Stephen Brown, and in today's video, guys, I want to try to figure out what the hell is going on with the Toronto Maple Leafs goaltending situation in Florida right now. And in order to do that properly, we need to go back to last Saturday night before the Toronto Maple Leafs took on the Montreal Canadiens in what was their final regular season home game. Knowing that it was their final regular season home game, the Maple Leafs made a decision to send down Joseph Woll because he was the only player on their roster at the time that they could, without requiring waivers, to then be able to afford to recall Wayne Simmonds, to play him in what could be his last home game at Scotiabank Arena. You know, for a guy who's only played 18 games this season, I don't know how likely it is that he plays for them in this year's playoffs. And it was a nice night. He factored into the game, he had a fight, his entire family was in attendance. They did right by the veteran. But afterwards, there was a very clear order of operations for what needed to happen next. Because also, on that same Saturday night, Matthew Knies' college team had lost in the Frozen Four finals, which made him eligible to sign an entry-level deal with the Toronto Maple Leafs. And if they wanted to see what he was all about, there was a very clear order of operations that they needed to follow in order to be salary cap compliant and still have two goalies on their roster. Or at least they thought so. Because if you go back to that Saturday game again, it was Ilya Samsonov who started in net, but it wasn't Matt Murray who was backing him up. He wasn't eligible to return because he's still dealing with some sort of a head or neck injury that he suffered in the game against the Red Wings, where he fell and kind of hit his head hard on the ice. So it was a goalie from the University of Toronto, Jed Alexander, who sat on the bench on an ATO and even got into the game for the final minute or so, and everybody sort of lost their minds over it. We're not going to get into it, but just for context, Chris Weidman of the Montreal Canadiens had that ridiculous quote where he said they'll get what they deserve in a few weeks for putting the ATO goalie in net with a minute left, up 7-1. And before we go any further, if you're wondering, well, why wouldn't the Maple Leafs just place Matt Murray on LTIR then? Or somebody else on LTIR and get some short-term cap relief? Well, if you place a player on LTIR, they need to stay there for 10 games during the regular season and 24 days of the schedule before being activated. And if your team has less than 10 games remaining in the regular season, you can't put a player on LTIR. And that's important context, because remember, the order of operations here was send Wayne Simmonds down, sign Matthew Knies, and then recall Joseph Woll under the emergency exception rule, which, according to Cap Friendly here for goalies, is the $0 cap hit emergency exemption recall can be used for both COVID and non-COVID absences. That means that if a team is short two healthy goalies for whatever reason, it's not specific, and do not have the cap space for a recall, they can immediately call up a goalie with a cap hit of $1 million or less and do not need to play short a goalie for one game. But then yesterday afternoon, it was announced that the Leafs would dress another ATO goalie against the Florida Panthers. And Jonas Siegel tweeting out that suggested that the emergency recall of Joseph Woll was not permitted. And according to Elliot Friedman, the NHL had a problem with the order of operations that the Toronto Maple Leafs tried to pull off the other day. Remember, send Wayne Simmonds down, sign Matthew Knies, and then use the $0 emergency recall to then get Joseph Woll back on the roster. The NHL determined that the Maple Leafs created their own emergency situation by sending Joseph Woll down in favor of signing Matthew Knies first. We saw the New York Rangers hit with a sort of similar situation earlier on in the year when they were trying to acquire Patrick Kane. They were sending as many guys as they could down to the AHL that did not require waivers to build up as much cap space as possible to be able to afford to pull off the move. My only problem with saying that the Maple Leafs created their own emergency situation by sending Joseph Woll down and signing Matthew Knies is that Kelly Yarncroke and Sam Lafferty were injured before yesterday's game. So that means that the Toronto Maple Leafs would have went into yesterday's game without Matthew Knies, with a roster of 10 forwards, 7 defensemen, and 1 goalie. So surely, being short both the amount of forwards and the amount of goaltenders that are usually required to play a hockey game, the Maple Leafs would be able to use their emergency recall on one or the other, right? Does it matter if they used the emergency recall on Matthew Knies and called up Joseph Woll with the cap space instead? No, but in reading into the rule here, it really does look like forwards and defensemen are separate from goaltenders under this one specific rule. Meaning, if you played short a goalie the previous game, you're only allowed to use the emergency recall on the goalie. And if you played short a forward or a defenseman, then you're only allowed to use the emergency recall on the forward or the defenseman. Like I said, if we weren't already in silly territory, we definitely are there now, because all of this headache, and Matthew Knies wasn't even supposed to play in that game yesterday. He only got into it because Sam Lafferty suffered an injury during practice that came up late. And all last night on the broadcast, all they could talk about was, well, what's going to happen tomorrow night? You know, is an amateur tryout goalie going to have to go in net tomorrow night? And I'm just sitting there at work listening to this. Like, surely, after we scrape the bottom of the barrel with this rule now, and the Leafs having played short a game with a goalie and short a game with a forward, that they'd be able to use the emergency recall on somebody, and the broadcast should be able to get somebody on my screen or with a headset to tell me that yes, they're going to be able to do one or the other. But apparently not. And this morning, the Maple Leafs had two mystery goalies on the ice, and Chris Johnston is here tweeting out, someone on an amateur tryout could find himself opposite to Andrei Vasilevsky tonight at 7 p.m. And you know, I don't pretend to know everything or be perfect here on this channel. I'm just one guy researching, filming, editing, and uploading these videos. You know, when the NHL blocked the emergency recall of Joseph Woll, they should have slipped in, hey, you'll be able to use this rule tomorrow. And that should have been communicated to the media, and that should have been communicated to us as well. Not that we're here watching our team, you know, some of us 20, 30, 40, 50 years that we've been watching hockey, and we don't know what the hell is going on. There's no professional sports league in the world that makes itself more difficult to be a fan of than the NHL. But after all of that, it appears as though Joseph Woll is now listed on the Leafs active roster, and more than likely gets the starting goal tonight. And I'm not upset about this because I think that the NHL is cheating the Toronto Maple Leafs. No, I'm upset about this because there shouldn't be a black market underworld to figure out who's in goal on the second half of a back-to-back for my favorite NHL team. I just want to know the damn rules. Somebody please tell me the damn rules. This league just makes it so difficult to be a fan of sometimes. And don't worry, I'm aware that I've sort of made my niche and cut my teeth here on YouTube by trying my best to explain these sort of situations. And maybe if the NHL wasn't such a dumpster fire when it comes to these sort of things, that this channel would have never have picked up the sort of steam that it did over the last 2 or 3 years, and we wouldn't be here right now. But at the same time, you know, while I like trying to figure these things out and explain them, I also really, really hate it. Because how is any of this accessible or helpful or make any sort of sense to, you know, the person that just wants to turn on and watch the game? Putting all of that aside, a game of hockey was played on Monday, and Matthew Knies did make his long-awaited NHL debut. And I'm comfortable saying that because Maple Leaf fans have been asking the question, you know, what can we expect from this guy for a very long time now? Well, this year at the University of Minnesota, he was one of the most effective forwards in all of college hockey, playing on what was the best line in all of college hockey, next to Logan Cooley, who was drafted 3rd overall last year, and Jimmy Snuggerud, who was drafted in the 1st round by the St. Louis Blues a couple of years ago. It's in my opinion that from watching every highlight that's been made available over the last 2 years, reading every single scouting report, and from having listened to him speak himself, because I do work for TSN SportsCenter and That's Hockey, and the 8 or 12 minute feature that Mark Masters did on him a couple of months ago, I was the one that put that together for That's Hockey that day when it ran on air. So I listened to him speak a lot that day in picking out the specific quotes that Mark wanted in his story. I think he will be successful if you put him in a position to succeed. And what I mean by that is, I don't think the play is to play him on a line with Nola Chari and Alex Kerfoot. I think that was just the safe option that the Maple Leafs went with last night because they didn't anticipate him playing in that game like Mark Masters had reported yesterday. I think if the Maple Leafs want to take advantage of his skill set and what made him so successful at the college level, they need to play him higher in the lineup. They need to play him in opportunities with higher skilled players because what he's best at doing is getting in on the forecheck, winning puck battles, and slipping into soft areas on the ice and just absolutely ripping pucks by goalies. And if the Maple Leafs aren't going to do that, I don't really see the point in playing him. Maybe that's a bit negative, but at the same time, I don't view him as a player at this point in his career anyway that can create offense by himself. So I don't really know how much you're going to get from him playing him with Nola Chari and Alex Kerfoot, but if you did play him with an Austin Matthews and Mitch Marner, or even some kind of combination of John Tavares, Ryan O'Reilly, and William Nylander, there's only one puck out there. And sometimes the third member of that line doesn't need to be an absolutely dynamite player carrying the puck up ice or feeding passes into the middle. Sometimes all that guy needs to be is an effective player away from the puck, and I think that Matthew Knies can be that player. Win puck battles in the corner, get in on the forecheck, and get open, and absolutely rip pucks by goalies. Maybe you might argue that that's too much responsibility for a guy who's just coming out of college, but at the same time, I would argue that it actually simplifies the game for him. He only needs to do 2 or 3 things out there, and that's not turn the puck over, get in and win the puck back, and get open when Matthews and Marner do have it. As for whether or not he's going to play game 1, round 1 of the playoffs, I don't know. We got to watch the next 2 games, and I'm sure we'll have more opportunities to talk about it then. But as for now, that's going to be it for this video, guys. Make sure to like the video if you did like it, and subscribe for more because more is always on the way. And guys, I'll see you again in the next one.